Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Unotumbler Stories, and today's episode is extremely special. We've, in our journey of looking at startups, we've looked at B2C, D2C, B2B, tech, SaaS, and HR tech and fintech and whatnot. Today's story is about a school. Yes, you guessed it right. It's about a school. I am going to be meeting the founder of this wonderful school. We are sitting outside, and the school is behind us, right? This promises to be a special episode. So, without any further ado, let's get right into it. All right, hi everyone. As promised, welcome to a very special episode of Unotumbler Stories. I have with me Sreeja, who's the founder and can I call you CEO as well? Founder and CEO of Sparklingmindz, right? This is an educational institute, right? And Sreeja, thank you so much for spending time for this. I don't know about you, but this is a very different experience for me. Sitting outside and kind of having this interview. The school is in the back, guys. And once again, welcome to the show, and I think thank you so much for sparing time. It will be great if you could introduce yourself, and then we'll get started from there.
Sure, all right. Hi everyone, my name is Sreeja, and like Utkarsh said, CEO, founder of Sparklingmindz. This is an educational venture, and we are working with the vision of creating confident learners and change makers amongst children. And so a little bit about my background. I'm an engineer turned MBA graduate turned educator and entrepreneur. And it's a very unconventional journey. I can imagine people wondering, how did this happen? Why did this happen?
Right.
What are you really doing that's worth your time, right? And why are you doing this at the end of the day, right? So I hope
so
to
as an educator, she's answered all the questions that I was about to ask her, right? So let me keep referring back to this as we go along. So fabulous.
I think that's a little bit about me. So
Right.
we can start with the
Yeah, absolutely. So I think how did it happen, right? I mean, how did you stumble upon this idea, and how did you get started?
Right. So there are three parts to my journey.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
So the first part is the student phase of my existence, and this is all rear view mirror looking 2020. But it's an interesting insight to look into, because as students sometimes we are coached and many a times told that we shouldn't be paying heed to our intuitions and how we're experiencing the world around us, or that we need to have a final goal in mind to do something, right? But what we're experiencing turns into reality later. So it's important to just collect it and really pay attention to how you are experiencing the world around you. Okay, so as a student, I did well in whatever I did, and always had this background bunch of people who probably didn't do as well, or were struggling with whatever they were doing, and I am focused on moving in a certain direction, right? And I'm like, oh, this is interesting, oh, that's interesting, oh, ye karna hai, ye acha hai, right? And I'm doing well. And there are these bunch of people. I still remember one particular boy, in 9th grade asking me this question. She said, life for you must be so difficult. I said, why? Why is it difficult? He said, itna pressure hai, ye marks maintain karne ka. And I remember very distinctly where I was standing and thinking ki, क्या pressure? I too love doing this. Okay. I enjoy doing whatever I do. I don't think they did.
Right.
I don't think they did, and that probably was an indicator for me to differentiate कि I loved. In some circumstantial way, I had developed a love for what I was doing, and it was never the pressure की marks. अगर आया भी तो भी चलता था, नहीं आया तो भी चलता था. मतलब I would have figured a way to move. Okay, तो वो भी learning है. Right. But they didn't see it that way. For them, it was about performance and pressure, and they were stuck in that loop. Okay, and at the end of the day, output में दिखता है किसी ने कर लिया, किसी ने नहीं कर लिया. But it's the mindset and the approach to something which actually. So I didn't know any better. Okay, so I went through, right? मुझे engineering करनी थी, engineering किया, first job out of campus, hardware. Okay, by the way, I'm a hardware semiconductor.
My God. Amazing.
Engineer, okay.
Hardware semiconductor engineer.
Turned educator,
Turned
right?
educator.
So,
Amazing.
I always, now, okay, again in hindsight, like to think of myself as somebody who always thought about systems, right? And hardware systems fascinated me, and it still fascinates me. You know, how do you build a system? And I tell people now I build human systems. So it is about systems at the end of the day, right? And it was that system. Now coming to the second phase, okay, so out of campus and got the job that I wanted, and I land on the first day. I got the job at Wipro, okay, Wipro VLSI, and I was very happy, my mentor and everything, very very excited about that job. I land at that campus and I see 60 buses and people walking in like ants, okay, and I look around me and I'm like, I don't belong. It was a very distinct voice from within that I just don't belong. That doesn't mean that I wasn't good at what I did or I was not happy. I was right, but kahin se andar se awaaz aa rahi thi ki this is not what I really want to do.
Right.
Okay, and then I asked myself an interesting question. Did the schooling well? No. Shouldn't schooling have taught me what I wanted
exactly.
to do? But it didn't. It didn't. And so if it failed me in some ways, you know, that not just skills, ye awareness ki what will make you happy was not with me, then what did I do for people who were so struggling or were unhappy in that entire journey itself, right? So then something is off, was sitting already, and in that journey I was like, you know, kya karna hai, you know, what do I do with my life, and discarded a couple of options, okay. So
and then when was this? What time?
This is 2003.
2003, okay.
Okay, it's been 20 years, the journey, okay. 2003, and I was moving on the path of, you know, doing the work, but at the same time, at the back end, there's existential crisis happening. You know, what do I do with my time and my life? And one thing led to another. You know, we were thinking about civil services at some point. I was like, I'm not greedy for power. That's not something that no realization came.
Right.
And then there's a book that I read, you know, by Tony Robbins, that Awaken the Giant Within, that really awakened something within me and started me off on thinking about change making and entrepreneurship.
Got it.
And I read an Asser report around that time about, you know, education and the plight of education. Something, you know, like floating. It's floating in my head. It's still not an idea. This is my second phase, okay. And coming from a middle class background, you know, with no entrepreneurial background in the thing, risking money and, you know, leaving a job and all of that stuff. There's no backing.
Absolutely.
Okay, so it was not an option for me to just leave job and do something. And I moved into a thinking process that where can I go to learn entrepreneurship and where can I so ISB happened in that journey for me. Okay, so now Utkarsh is my ISB classmate, okay? So ISB happened in that journey, and I am constantly thinking about what can I start. Every single class is about, okay, what can I start, what can I do, what can I do.
Amazing.
I thoroughly enjoyed every moment in ISB, okay, because all this will start, okay. And I was running with some venture thought and all that stuff even towards the end, but for whatever reason that didn't materialize, and I had a loan to this thing, so I went and joined back into a semiconductor strategy role, which was a linear progression. Paid off my loan, and this is my third phase now. I am joining another education startup. Okay. Because education was very clear.
And this was when?
2009.
2009.
Okay, so you see the
genesis I know.
So somebody in my team asked me a very interesting question. Okay, so they were like, ma'am, how do you know you are ready? How do you know you can start? I said, you give yourself sufficient time to listen to yourself and sufficient time to buffer. Then the risk is not a risk. It is a movement in some direction, right? So I gave myself that buffer. And the third very key thing is my middle class background helped. I live very low key, right? So there is no such thing कि यार इतने सारी चीजों के लिए पैसा नहीं होगा. Money is never a constraint because you can live in very
limited means.
Very little. That is always a blessing according to me. If you learn today, and that is one thing that I want to tell every single generation of people, next generation of people, that live in very less, as less as possible. And I'm not talking about minimalism. I'm talking about really knowing what are the needs you have and what are your desires, and limit that to a level where you can take risks. Without that, no amount of money will ever be enough. Right?
So true, man. This is really true.
Right?
Really
so
true.
In 2009, I joined this startup with full intention to continue and work with them. So they were working. I really chased them down, by the way. Okay. And one of my known contacts in DC had connected me to them. And the whole conversation was around, they had created a product, full hardware, firmware, software, full stack.
Okay.
As a teacher's aid. This is the educomp time, okay, where B2B sales is happening.
Got it.
And they wanted to figure out if this can be placed as a low-cost teacher's aid. So every teacher carries like a device to the class, which is already enabled on whiteboard, and is able to download and create content and show something aligned to her.
Wow, amazing.
Yeah, exactly. Amazing idea, right? But then I went to about, in a short span of 6 months, about 80 schools in and around Bangalore and South India, Indus International Presidency or low-cost, affordable private schools, government schools, all kinds of schools. And one thing stood out to me is the teachers are already overburdened with a lot of stuff. Okay, there is no space for them to think, and there's no training being provided to think in the way that thinking needs to happen. Okay, administrative training is being provided, but not for this. And the second thing is there are lots of issues like power and this and that, and already junk technology sitting in those spaces.
Some legacy technology that they would be
already sitting, and children are not benefiting from it, and there is no pedagogical standing for this work. Okay, so then it was very clear to me as I stood out, which basically begins my Sparkling Mindz journey, is that the system needs to shift. There is some systemic change that needs to happen, and the only way it can, you can't do it from within an existing school setup, right? So what is off, what needs to change is the journey of Sparkling Mindz that started, okay?
Amazing.
And one thing that a very clear moment for me, I was in presidency, and epiphany dawns on you, and I was looking at a classroom and I turned around, I'm like, nothing has changed in this class except the blackboard is now a whiteboard. Nothing has changed. The teacher is still reading content out. There's no way to know if the children have understood something. And the understanding is also at this level, right? Your identify level. That's not enough to know. And what are these children going to do with it? And even if that doing is just a project, then what is the reflection? What's the awareness? All of that. So that begins my journey of Sparkling Mindz. Children are not getting what they need to be successful or to feel joy in living and learning. Okay, and that's essential for you because you're a human being. So early 2009-10 is when the genesis of this is happening, and 2011 I start Sparkling Mindz. Beginning of 2011 I started.
Okay, so essentially 2011 was when you formally started.
Yes.
Okay, and how did you start? What was it? Was it a big setup, small setup?
Good question. Okay. Again, coming from where I come from, I'm like, I'm a big fan of lean startup. Okay. So and I was testing the idea. I was like, will there be a market for this? I think it's a great idea. Yes, I have been inside schools. Looks like children need it, but will I make money with it? Because if I'm not going to make money, then I'm not really sustaining this whole thing, right? And I think coming from where I was coming from, NGOs and all that were not something that I wanted to approach, because I wanted to really see that if there is a need, the money needs to appear in that whole scheme of things. And education is a big expense in Indian, especially Indian diaspora. It's an expense that people do spend towards, right? So the question was, how do we enable children to develop those skills that they need to walk a fulfilled, happy, joyous life, right? And 21st century skills was doing the rounds at that time. So you can pick up thinking, communication skills, emotional skills, right? Awareness, interpersonal skills, values, behaviors. How do I develop those behaviors, right? How do I develop a sense of agency and voice in a child, in a sense, right? So we started in 2011 with nothing, actually. There was this hippocampus in Bangalore, and this is a real test, because I said if a year I can sustain myself, pay myself the same salary or generate enough money as I was generating as an employee. This is viable. That's my test.
That was your break even.
That's my test of viability, right? So about 5 to 6 locations we tied up with preschools, libraries across Bangalore, and I was like, "Patani, where it'll generate the idea? Who will?" So I would go put up posters in libraries and one man show. Okay, one man show. I'm only going and doing all of this, talking to people, generating the content. And
so in these libraries, in schools and libraries, you basically are just
workshops.
Okay.
So I said I will do a 1 hour session on creative thinking for children. 2 hour session for creative thinking with children, and then I'll meet parents after that. What am I telling them? children have done this. Here is a long-term program that we will launch. Will you sign up?
Okay.
Okay. So I did this about for 3 months.
And these workshops were free?
No, I charged.
You charged? Wow.
I said if you pay and come, then there's a chance.
Even better.
100 rupees, 200 rupees. But I charged. Okay.
Good.
I charged. I was like, it's important to test it, right? Free if you come for free, then I tell you there's a paid program and you don't pay. How does it work, right? So we had I did about 12 to 13 such locations over 3 months and met with lots of parents, got lots of feedback. And that's such a enriching journey for an entrepreneur to get feedback that somebody showed up. I have had no workshop where I had nobody. Like every workshop I had 20 children, 30 children. I had to run multiple workshops in Hippocampus. By then summer camp happens, I run summer camps, right? So the idea, a 2-hour thing becomes a 1 week long thing, right? And slowly we design, I hire a curriculum designer with me, I hire a facilitator with me, I start training people, right? Still I don't have a place. So we operate out of these 6 locations on weekends, on Saturdays, Sundays, right? And I schedule things. They will help me do some amount of marketing, I do some amount of it, people come in, but I only close the deals. And so we had 6 locations running in parallel. The first day we did 600 children.
Oh wow.
Right? And I was like, this works.
There's something which is happening.
It works, right? And then we debated between continuing to run light like that versus having our own space, and a lot of things pointed in the direction that would be good for us to have our own space while we run these places. It became a anchor for a brand and all of that. So we took a space in Kalyan Nagar. That was our first space. A year after we had actually
doing this
started.
workshops and
Exactly. And it was a small space. Again, it was not a flashy thing. We didn't even do flashy stuff. I had just bare minimum money that I put into the construction and the design. And
this was like already a pre-made kind of
commercial setup.
Exactly.
It's a commercial setup, and we took up a space. Actually, if you want to mark that location, it was right above that, the Better India did their first location too. Right? So they came a little later. I was there already. And so Dhimant and Anuradha were right on the top.
Got it.
And that location then enabled us to really have people come in. So we used to run Saturday, Sunday, weekday evenings, parallel batches, lots of batches of children coming, doing, while we parallelly ran other locations. At some point, we felt like, it's no point in sending people out. We should do some other model to expand. And we rolled that back. We continued running this space. Right. So all of that led to a very interesting point at which children used to come to our space for 2 hours on a weekend and refuse to leave. Okay. So the parent will be like, this child who goes to a regular school or a preschool doesn't want to go there as much as they want to come to this place, right? See, this is a very dicey slope to take, because it's very easy to make children happy by showing them chocolate, giving them very less something to do, or kuch bhi kar lo, right? It's very easy to give them that kind of a space. But we also were able to show that these children were thinking, and these children were creating output, and these children were showing shifts in behavior outside of the space, and doing it happily and joyously, right? That really caught parents' attention, and they started talking about preschool. I was like, no, who wants to teach?
And at this point in time, these were still like 2-hour workshops that you were doing in your own space, basically.
Correct, our own space, but long-term programs. So now people would sign up for. Initially, we did 3 months. Every quarter sign up programs. Then we said no, you have to do a year, because in 3 months if you leave, then the thinking of the child is not really developed. Then I'll become a very output oriented program. We're doing a process with the children. You will see the output, right? So right now we run very similar to what we established about 3 years into the program. We do a 5-year model and 3-level model. We created all of this, and it's a completely gamified curriculum. So children come in and they play games to learn how to become aware of their own emotions. So there's a complete social emotional learning package. There's a lot of creative thinking and critical thinking related games, and we contextualized it. So context is your own life. Context is the world's problems. Context is the media that you engage with. Context is not your textbook. Context is not science, right? So there was no problem for a child who may have been struggling with reading or writing to come and think, which is really enriching and enabling and empowering for a child, right? So we completely eliminated that in the design and enabled this to happen. So our children do this still runs. It's a program that we still do.
Correct.
Yeah, so they said, why don't you start a preschool, right? And I said, no. Why would somebody teach children ABCD? I'm not teaching that. I'm teaching them thinking.
Exactly.
Right? I'm teaching them emotional skills, right? That's what I'm gonna do. And one thing led to another, and I was very curious to understand how can we teach children how to think and make that visible. So in searching for who could be a good mentor or where could I learn from, right, I stumbled upon a Future of Learning course from Harvard Graduate School of Education, HGSC, and it seemed like a great place to go and figure this out. It's a short course, but there's sufficient exposure for somebody who wants to figure things out. So I went and I met with so Howard Gardner was sharing that program, and so I have already been exposed to multiple intelligences, and we used to follow it in the way that he's talking about. But then he went Reggio. Okay, so Reggio Emilia is an inspired philosophy located in a small town called Reggio Emilia in Italy. And it's a very child-centric, child-led model of emergent learning. And for small children, preschool age children. So it's a post World War II kind of a philosophy. And what was interesting was that he said it so many times. And I was like, okay, what is it, right? So I went and explored. This is 2013. So I'm going online and I'm checking this out, and I fell in love with it. I was like, this is beautiful. This is how learning should happen. And it's very aligned to how we do things in the after school program. And if this is a way that children could learn for more time, I became a little greedy. More time, then yes, it makes sense, And I came back, it took us about a year to really settle down. I had a curriculum designer who was a PhD in education research and all of that, and I had a bunch of staff which was really excited about doing this. I also came back with a more deeper understanding of game-based learning. We used to do activity and experiential learning before that. Game-based learning and how to include that. So there's a school called Quest to Learn in New York, which a particular agency was actually designing that whole school in a way that they could execute the schooling in a game-based manner, but it was more of a tech-enabled environment, and I was asking myself, can games enable learning of these 21st century skills, so that's how the whole curriculum got transformed. So it took us about 2 years to transform the entire curriculum, and we today run a complete game-based curriculum on that. Thinking, communication.
So your entire curriculum is like gamified.
Yes, and we do the school also that way. So that is the next journey.
So hold that thought. I think, wow, I am like, it's amazing. This is amazing. So I think at that point in time, and this probably would be what, an year and a half into the existence of Sparkling Mindz?
By now, so if you're looking at preschool starting and all, we're already 3 years in.
3 years in. Okay, so 3 years in, and then you obviously kind of figured this out. You did this short course and kind of figured it out. And at that point in time, how many children were you?
So we were catering on an annual basis. We were easily catering to more than 500 children.
Okay.
Right.
Wow. Okay.
The thing was, at that point we are operating at weekday evenings and weekends.
Right. So because this is like a supplement to the regular school that.
Correct.
Children already
children
go to.
Can't come in the morning, right? And we would do training and all
evenings
that
and weekends. So that used to be the sort of thing.
And it is it's a very interesting model on who you recruit and how they work. And at the end of the day, the work we did, which was process-oriented work and not output. See, if you look at Vedic mathematics or you look at abacus, you look at art and craft, koi bhi hobby classes, and you compare it with the work we do, it's very different.
Right.
Because there's an output. Art seekh jayega bacha, ya fir craft seekh jayega, or the piano, the child will start playing the piano. There are levels to that. Now, what are you teaching the child, right? It's a at that time, it was unheard of, that program, that kind of a program. And we probably had 1 or 2 such people, similar-minded people in India who were doing something else, right? In schools. And so we had all of those conversations amongst ourselves. Should we go intercept this in schools? Should we do a franchisee model, right? What would help scale this, right? And what sat very interestingly for us is that we were very keen on measuring change and impact. Instead of just outcomes. And that led us on the journey from the preschool to the school, because we were like, you're talking about this child whom you're trying to impact, and if you know the whole circumstances, you can really say how much of impact a program like this is creating versus something else, right? And of course, the children who did preschool with us refused to leave. So that became a problem for me that I had to address.
Right.
They were like, the way you have worked with the children, nobody else is going to take it forward.
Yeah.
So even if it means you're going to create a shed and do something, we'll stay with you. And I'm like, I don't know what that means. Right? By then, our game-based learning curriculum had really evolved, and we had stuck upon a couple of ideas on how the universality of language and math, etc., can be at the core gamified.
Got it.
Okay, and that really excited us, because one is you do a niche curriculum, the other is you do a more universal thing which actually reaches out to more people and can create more impact. Right? And that kind of led us on this journey to the school, which with the pandemic and everything has been a journey.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
So I can talk more about it.
Yeah. No, amazing. I think then this so 3 years into the journey, 2014, 14-15 was when you formally launched the
14 we started the preschool.
Okay.
And by the time we had children all the way till UKG first year itself.
Okay.
And we did ensure that they got whatever they needed.
Got it.
It was a joyous experience.
And what was the strength in one year?
The first batch was 15 children.
15 children. Okay. Wow. Okay. That's how you started.
But we already had an after school program that was running,
that was going on, but for this particular thing, 15 children
we had. And we had a very small space also. It was not
must be a special time though.
Special
right?
time, very special time. In fact, many of those children still with us.
Oh wow.
Still with us. It's their it'll be their 9th year.
Wow.
Now because they started in preschool, right? So those 4 plus they're now going to 6th. My first batch of children is going to 6th.
Wow.
But there were some children who were older, so they are going to 8th.
Got it.
My first school child graduated
already.
Yes.
Amazing. Amazing.
So we've had a first bunch of 10th graders graduate.
Wow.
This year we have a first bunch of 11th grade equivalent. We are calling them something. I can tell you about that design.
Right.
So at the end of the day, if you niche it to what we really wanted to do was create inspiring, confident learners and change makers. So everything that we are doing actually revolves around that.
Wow.
And it is a journey to try and create systems which then we can replicate in other places in the most humanistic manner. And franchisee systems didn't seem humanistic to us at all.
Yeah.
So we are going on that path right now. How can we create communities which can take this, replicate it, and do more in that direction?
But tell me something. When you started off, then obviously when you registered as a preschool, and then you went on from there, then wouldn't you have to register like with some of the boards and those? So essentially now, as an outsider who's doing their own thing, now suddenly you are becoming part of this huge ecosystem which runs in a very specific way. So walk us through that. How did that happen? How did that go?
So there are local laws, right? So you have to register with the local BEO, right? And so we did the education department. Permissions have to happen. School has to have permissions.
Right.
And we slowly, gradually unknotted this whole loop, right? So I can do a complete session on syllabus versus exam versus right?
Sure.
But in short, this whole 10th grade, 12th grade exam that people are so crazy about, right? The people who conduct those boards are not people who dictate syllabus. Okay? And they are, even if they dictate syllabus, what gets executed in the classes is a curriculum. Okay, so there's a difference between these, and there's a lot of freedom which people will not agree, but there is a lot of freedom that schools have on how they get to execute this.
Correct.
Right? Because nobody will come and say that you have to teach.
In this particular
there are metrics and there are ways to actually design and look at these things, and there is syllabus. I'm not saying no, but when your intention is to do really good job with the child, the syllabus falls by the wayside because you do a lot more with the child, right? So what we've done is we've designed it in a way that our children run 1.5 years, 2 years above the curriculum, above the syllabus. So we get a lot of freedom to do the curriculum the way we want to, right? Even by the time our children finish LKG, UKG, so we don't like to call ourselves an alternative space. Okay, so from a schooling perspective or from a learning perspective, there is fear associated with exams. And there is we have to do this, that joyous lack of joyous space that I was talking about. Versus if you walk this path with joy, you can do a lot. There's nothing that somebody's actually like CBSE paper and was asking what from a child. Nothing actually, right? And it's that nothing which then drives nothing down. Right? If you actually asked a child to think and to think beyond themselves and collaborate and contribute to the society, they will do a lot more. But then you need to create an ecosystem which provides for that, right? And that's not something that people want to do. It's an easier thing to work with. Absolutely. So the fear is not being driven by the state government department or the education department. It's being driven from that examination model. And then people are people's lack of imagination, if I may, true. So what we did is we took the syllabus, we looked at things, and we were still debating between CBSE, should we do CBSE, should we do we opened out all the boards, CBSE, boards, right? So we like to think of ourselves as more balanced model. So we don't say don't write exams. We don't even say knowledge is not important or this content is too much. No, nothing is too much. Actually, children can learn to learn. Children can learn any of this. Our children write exams, right? Joyfully. Because exams are a process to get to know how well you're doing. And there is no labeling on top of that, right? But if you did not score something, it's a reflective question, what happened and what can I do to fix the practices. So constant work on mastery based practices, learning science based practices comes into the school and is enabling children to figure things out, right? And it has been a very interesting journey, like you rightly said, from an outsider regular school. If in a regular system we can do the gamified curriculum, we can make children think, then there is a strength to the work that we have created. Absolutely. So that is something that we have validated at this point, right? Our children did the regular gamified stuff, did the whole metacognitive process-oriented learning stuff. Actually, right now we run changemaker missions in the schools too, right? So our children think beyond themselves on a lot of fronts. Doing all that, they write exams too, right? And you talk to them, they're regular children, right? Children are children. But you probe a little bit, you begin to see there is some depth, some understanding, some awareness, right? They'll throw tantrums, they will get fear, but then what you do with that fear matters.
That's important.
So the moving it into a process-oriented setup where the outcome can happen, but you're walking towards impact and change, right? And that path we've been able to create at school, and that has been a very gratifying experience.
Fabulous, This is so fabulous. And you right now, how has the school grown? So you obviously, like you said, started from preschool and then went on from there.
Correct. So in about a year and a half's time, our first grade started because we already had UKG. One batch we graduated out. We couldn't accommodate, but the second batch of the children moved into our first grade. And we started.
And you continue to operate in that same space?
No. By the time school has to happen, that space is not enough. So we had to move, and we leased out this land, and the construction took some time. We operated out of another beautiful campus called Vistar, which is close by. Again, very socially aligned space and all that. 34 children is what we started with. All the way from 1st till 5th grade. And we had one 6th grade child who's open to ab 5th mein laga do, 6th mein laga do, chalega. And we had created a curriculum, again, like I was saying, gamified. But what we gamified, so what happens if you look at typical games in the edtech market, otherwise, the game is on mastery. Or on knowledge, right? We said skill pe game create karna. So we have a game for comprehension. We have a game for problem solving. We have a game for teaching children how to do inquiry and experimentation. And the game, see, don't go by the game station building thing. The game is the game principles where feedback is ongoing. The score is actually reflective of where you have learnt and what you have lost marks on, right? There's a pace to it. There's collaboration, right? Everybody is a participant. There's no teacher involved, right? The game itself enables movement. And we layered knowledge on top of this fast-paced movement of deep skills, right? We call those purposeful learning areas, So we don't teach children English for the sake of English, right? It is so that they can express themselves and they can communicate. These two things don't happen, that game has not worked.
That's correct.
Right? So the metrics is that. And as we grew, we realized that all this learning, in many ways, more ways than one, children were learning like this, very privileged, right? If it does not translate to something beyond them, you're again creating an outcome in a more stylish way. Outcome would be the exam marks and graduates. So so were born something called change-making missions that children participate in school today, okay? And it is all about context. It's all about what they are really able to do with all that they are learning. And children today, not 10 years from now, not 18 years from now, can be change makers is the philosophy of that whole thing. So children work on 4 missions, okay? One is a climate change related mission they call TRUI, which is tinker, reduce, reuse, recycle, upcycle and innovate. So TRUI. The other one is called mission child vulnerability. So they came up with this whole thing about child rights and public spaces not being available for children, and children's agency not being allowed to be exercised, right? And abuse and all of that. All conversations happen in that space. So it's called MCV. Even the fact that there are children who don't have access to education and everything, you know, covered under MCV. Then we have a thing called SM Plates, which is basically about healthy living and healthy eating. I'll tell you how these emerged. That's the interesting story. And then there's community stories and practices. So they have questions around, you know, why, you know, these festivals, why these rituals, why should girls who are menstruating are treated a certain way, right? All of those. Why should we do puja? Why should we not do? Why are we not allowed to celebrate Halloween, right? Or we want to celebrate Halloween. Then the conversation is about what, right? So very interesting. So the first mission that emerged, I still remember, is around MCV. Children, so we have newspapers that get into the space, and children do something called newspaper routine, where they're engaging, connecting, asking questions to an article of their choice. It could be anything. So they cut out those articles and they do a process, and they were doing a process on it. And there's this particular girl who brought an article which said out of the 3 crore calls that were made to child helpline, 1.3 crore calls were muted. That means nobody spoke. And the reason it was significant is that the call was held online for over 5 minutes on an average. That means somebody is crying. So the child was asking, ma'am, why would somebody call the child helpline and not talk? This was this 12-year-old's question, okay? And we got talking and we discussed, and a lot of things opened up. They researched, right? That led to this mission that, okay, we want to work on this thing beyond us. And I think people don't talk about urban spaces. They research on child helpline, okay, and they realized a bunch of things. Urban spaces also, a lot of bullying, a lot of sexual abuse happens on children. Nobody talks about it. And I said, if children don't talk about it, who is going to talk about it, right? So the children took it up, and that became a mission. This is back in 2018-19, okay, but slowly it evolved into becoming a more systemic thing in our spaces. Again, junk food, you know, somebody they measure the balanced meal amongst themselves, and wastage measurement happens, and they're like, but you know, there are certain children who constantly bring junk food, and what is wrong in eating it? Shouldn't we have it once in a while? These conversations emerge. That led to this discussion that, you know what, we don't know about hidden sugars. We're not understanding what people are. Should we believe packaged food? So a lot of discussions around that led to this. So our children are experimenting with healthy food, packaging it, selling it to each other. They decided on birthdays they will not bring anything chocolate. Okay. Right? Just not, they decided, right? Same thing, they figured out after doing waste segregation and all that here, that lots of chocolate wrappers emerged. Imagine, so right now we have about 200 children in the space, right? Imagine out of the 200, every day 3 of them bring chocolates to the space. How many wrappers, right? And where is this wrapper going? They said, no, we don't contribute to climate change, okay? Took them to a landfill, which is hardly 2.5 kilometers from here, okay? It's full.
Full mountains.
And they were like, our waste goes here, like this waste we segregate goes here. Right? So this conversation then plugging in with the deeper skill in the learning area, right, gave us a lot of leverage, and these children are acquiring a changemaker identity and contributing beyond themselves. So all of this coming together is now, we are now, okay, after 12 years of our existence at this point, going back to our after school program, saying that, you know, that should club into this change making, and we are creating a platform which can scale. So we are at this point ready.
Amazing.
Yeah, because unless there's deep work done, no, it's very easy to create scale and raise money today, of course.
Absolutely.
But unless we at this point, the whole team feels very convinced that the work we are doing will impact lives. We were not looking at scaling and impact lives in a way that, you know, somebody new coming in can do the same work.
Exactly. It's replicable.
Correct. It has to be replicable, right? And in order to replicate something, I didn't want to dilute the work we were doing, and that has taken its time.
It's taken its time. That's okay. It sometimes, you know, has to take the time it has to take for the thing to emerge.
True,
right?
and also once you commit, like a school,
Huh.
you've committed to children, and the 10th grade, even if it's 5 children, has
Huh.
to be given what they need.
Right.
So
Right.
we signed up with Cambridge. That answers. So we did Cambridge. We did
Okay.
not go with CBSE
Okay.
because the culture in the school is of wonder and of thinking and of
Right.
contributing
Got it.
to learning and deeper asking of questions and application. Right. So if we went with CBSE in 10th grade, if children wrote papers which needed mugging up and rote learning, or that much of thinking was enough, right? Then it will percolate down, and our youngest of bunch will refuse to put in that patient work
Right.
to solve problems,
Right.
because they will say, if it is exams, we will do it. What you are saying, we don't agree. Right, so now we are in a position where we can show them much beyond the
Right.
paper, but
Right.
at that time it was very important for us to choose a board. And the thing is, Cambridge gives sufficient amount of thinking and application,
Correct.
but while not making it so elite that only a few people can do it. Okay, it's
Right.
not like totally off, but you can't, they don't actually, what they do, very interesting things. In a math paper, they would say, this is the question, prove that this is the answer.
Acha. Oh, okay.
I love it. It's such an easy way to take the pressure off.
Right.
To let
Rather
the
than say find the answer.
Because then you can make silly mistakes.
Exactly.
Right? But silly mistakes, there's no space. So
Right,
it's
right,
not
right.
about the calculation. It is not, while the child needs to know it, but it's
Absolutely.
about being able to show your thinking.
Right.
Right? It's very interesting.
Right,
So I
right.
like that whole thinking process, and I see CBSE and other papers are also
Yeah.
kind of morphing into
Yeah,
this.
yeah.
But it needs the teacher training and handholding. So
Ah.
that's what the platform is going to do for
Okay,
us.
okay.
Right? That this patient problem solving need to be taught to the teachers
Got it.
so that they can do this work.
Got
right?
it.
So we are very excited about the work that we have
this
done.
is super. Yeah, super. So right now, guys, we are in a 7-acre space.
Yes.
Right. So a little bit more about your new space.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So the school space, when we thought of creating and developing more, right, we were very clear that we don't want to look and feel like a typical school with a lot of rooms. You go to architects, that's what ends up happening. You tell them all these things, and then they will end up designing you something which again looks conventional, right? Or else you want to do something unconventional, becomes extremely costly in nature to work with, and inefficient in terms of space.
Right.
So we want to create the space, morph the space into a community space first of all, where families and children can come and spend time actively engaging in slow-paced enjoyment. Okay,
Right.
no fast, no quick, no overwhelming colors and noise. Right, children deserve those kind of
Right.
spaces. Right, so and our children next year are going to design this. Okay, so that's
Oh.
going to be how the space is going to be, and all the change, all the change making. So it takes time. So today I tell you, it's not going to happen tomorrow.
Absolutely,
Right, it may take
yeah.
a couple of years, but
Right.
it'll get done. Right, and what we do is we prototype. So we'll create something small, something simple, invite the community in. Right, and we make it better. Right, we keep moving. For the school itself, the larger space of the school itself, we are really looking for the missions to lead the way.
Got it.
Right, so there are a lot of spaces where children will have these missions moving in, and they're creating products, they're creating services, they're creating workshops, they're creating startups, and creating work generation for communities around. This is the vision that space, and then the learning spaces will happen on its own, because that's connected to and adjacent to these spaces. And we don't do classroom models, we do learning spaces model. So our children go from class to class where the learning spaces are happening. And they really engage, because the facilitator who owns that space along with the children puts up their documentation of the work.
Wow.
The game space remains in that space.
So help me out. So you don't have classrooms.
No. So the thing we tell people is, if we are going to reimagine education, apart from the paraphernalia, yes, we need permissions, right? See, nobody is telling us not to do this.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, but we have to reimagine how children live and breathe in the space.
Brilliant.
And for example, classroom, they don't sit in benches like this, they sit in pods. And they move from pod to pod for learning. They may move from pod to pod. They peer teach each other quite a bit, right? They know that they can come together and do this, right?
Superb.
Yeah, so it's the same thing with fitness and everything that we do.
So essentially, you've kind of innovated on the way that you are actually obviously you have your own kind of IP in terms of your curriculum, but you also innovated in the way that you are imparting this education as well.
Yes.
Right.
Yes,
so I think so
Yeah.
brilliant. Yeah. This is
So last year
great.
we were thinking about the larger space, and we've been thinking, and all stakeholders come together to think about it, right? Children also contribute, and they're also very
Right.
excited. So we're thinking about this, and what became very exciting for us to talk about is. Should we experiment with, so up until the year before pandemic, children were having their own spaces, and facilitators used to come, and we're like, where will we hold the game space, how do we leave it around, and all of that. So this year, last year when we decided to shift it, we said, why wait for the big school to happen? Let's shift it. Let's make it happen. So we actually ran a year with children going from class to class. Spaces to spaces.
Okay.
And it works.
It
works. It was beautiful, and it didn't feel like we lost out on something. And there was a lot of, and the neuroscience studies says, like children moving in between classes is actually good for them. Right? So our children move, between classes, they run and go to places, and we always have that space for them to do free play, right? It's important. So the testing of the ideas has always been in our DNA.
Super.
Right? So we test it, we figure out, and when I'm telling you the ideas that work, there must be hundreds of ideas that have not worked.
Absolutely.
Right?
That's how it happens.
Right? So there are lots of things that have not worked, and we have had like-minded parents join this community too, where they see that process is important, right? And we help the parents, reduce their anxiety, that, when you focus on process, output happens. But when you focus on output, you lose the child. And you lose the connection with the child. At the end of the day, education should help create individuals who are connected with themselves, who can actually live with the changing times without leaving their core of who they are. They evolve, they grow, but they know who they are and who they want to grow into, right?
Correct.
So that VUCA world that we're talking about, where children need to learn to deal with change, starts with them connecting with themselves.
Exactly.
And knowing that who they are is so that they can contribute to something beyond themselves, and everything that they're learning enables this to happen. Then there is a purpose to all of this. And that's where the learning and education should get anchored.
Super. Excellent. I think one important thing that we've not touched upon is so far is your team.
Yes.
Right? I think it will be fabulous to hear how you enlisted a few more crazy people like you onto this mission, right? So I think it'll be great to understand how the team kind of came together, and what's the team like now.
It's a wonderful experience. Okay. Crazy, heartbreaking, at the same time wonderful. So in the beginning, so we've had change of teams, phases of change of teams, because as we've grown from after school to preschool plus after school plus preschool after school, not everybody can sustain this, right? So we've had a change of teams, but I always had a designer of sorts work with me. So I had somebody who was from a PhD background, I had somebody from NIFT who was working with me as designing. So the game-based curriculum and all that. We have products that we've designed. So all of this that between these two we've worked. And at some point I had a person who had an operations background join me. And he has a naval background and very crazy, like you said, join me, and enabling the cultural shift to happen, from me to the organization was embodied through him quite a bit. So that is Minesh Happy. He's still with us. And the other two people at some point parted ways, and then I formed another team, which now is completely aligned with this philosophy that we're working with, this evolved philosophy that we're working with. And each learning area, each purposeful learning area has its own leaders that have emerged, and I have another person who's come from a curriculum and pedagogy background, who is my co-designer, partner in crime, who works with me. She's a literacy background, and I come from a data sciences and math and engineering background, right? So together we design this whole thing. I also make sure that I don't hire people who think they are just teachers, right? Versus they think of themselves as somebody who can impact the child's life in many ways. Teaching happens to be one of the ways that I can facilitate, I can mentor, I can coach, and most of all they think of themselves as learners. So if I think of myself as a learner, then I, by being who I am, impact the child, right? So then this is the cultural shift that we have been able to achieve, that as together, right, we as a team, don't go into cribbing, don't go into gossip, right? We work on ourselves, work on a sense of purpose, are transparent in interacting on ideas,
right.
and there is trust and safety
Right,
in that
right.
space.
In that
Once
space,
there is
yeah.
trust and safety in our space, it is available for children. If it is not available with us, we burn out because we are conflicted
No,
and there's
absolutely.
politics happening.
Yeah.
So one of the biggest things that has been is, one is the design process, the other is a cultural creation process, where if we have to take something to children which is so unique and innovative, or anything impactful, it needs a collaborative bunch of people working towards a common purpose, and not towards personal agendas,
Right.
which can very easily be the case in schools where teachers end up working in silos. Fortunately, unfortunately, the team building aspect of it is absent. That way, if we don't build this kind of a culture, we are not doing justice to children, because they don't see a cohesive value being held.
Right.
Yeah,
And
so
how big is your team?
we are about support staff and team, everything included, with 30 people.
30 people. Okay. Wow. Okay. Amazing. So guys, I think this is, and I think one of the things that, at least one key takeaway for me, obviously, has been kind of you've obviously taken your time, right? I think you've given it time, you've taken your time, and you need to be content, because I think, especially in the education business, right, and as a young parent myself, right, I mean, my kids are 3 and 5, right, so I understand what really you are trying to build, right, and I think it'll be the easiest thing, would have been the easiest thing for you to really scale it up. I don't see any, like you also mentioned, I don't see any lack of resources or money to kind of do that. In fact, I'm sure you would have spoken with somebody, right? And people in the past, and they would have asked you to just scale it up using the franchisee model and all of that, right?
People did tell me, just scale it, do the after school, right? And for me, until it sits right and we are doing the right thing by the child, and we can show the impact, it didn't make sense. And you're right, all the pieces need to come together, right? Who are these people who we can train and upskill? What is this platform that can enable this to happen without loss of quality? And what is this change that others can see already, right? I think all of that needs to come together. And I tell people, education is a very complex problem, right? There are no easy solutions.
No, absolutely.
And the more people do quick fix solutions,
right,
the more there is burnout in the system that needs to be addressed, right? So
and one aspect, I think, of your, obviously, your journey, has to be family, right? I mean, how is that kind of, the kind of support that you would have got, right? Because this is very unconventional. I mean, as unconventional as it can be, right? So, especially from the background that you're coming from. So, how did that pan out, right?
I think the space I gave myself in the beginning also, remember I said 2003, 2009, 10, right? And paying off my loans, etc., not being financially dependent too much on for my needs, really helped the family stay a little calm, right? My husband jokes, I thought you were my you were my ticket to freedom. Now I became
it's the other way around.
But it is what. So actually, with him, I had a pact before marriage. Okay, that I'm gonna start something.
Right.
You have to come along. So his only thing was, don't do something so crazy that I have to deal with your burnout. Right. So that I gave him the space to kind of see it. See it's working. And he's been my sounding board for quite some time. To figure out what I would just go dump on stuff, and he doesn't. So he's not from this space, education space at all, right? He comes from a software space, but that additional perspective always helps. And my parents obviously were always quite helpful and quite supportive, and they want me to be happy. They've always just wanted me to be happy, and I think that has been a strong driver. Remember the student me, joy. They never said कि first आना है, करना है. वो तो हो गया. That happened. That was something that I could aspire to, and I got. But it was always about me being happy. And I question myself, that is the highest leverage of happiness being comfortable or pushing yourself, and that led to more and more happening, right? So it was always that journey. They've always been like that. My brother has been a big support in the entire journey, and actually for my parents and my brother, the building wouldn't have been
Okay.
started. Right, financially.
So the construction is ongoing as we speak. So if there is some background noise, we apologize in advance, right? But so this construction has been going on now for how long?
So the building itself is 5-6 years old.
Okay.
So what we wanted to do was create a slightly self-learning kind of a space for children on the top. So it's a semi-permanent structure kind of a thing that we're creating. But the backside space where we have is where the larger next level of construction will happen.
Got it.
This will get done in it's just been a month.
Okay.
It will get done another month.
Okay.
Before the school starts, we'll be ready.
Got it. And this campus now is home to how many
years old?
And how many children?
So we have 200
children based out of this campus, and they come from like neighboring areas, close
about
by
10
areas.
to 5 to 15 kilometers.
5 to 15 kilometers, and you've got buses and so I think that's
we fly our own buses.
Yeah, we fly our own buses. Yeah. So
that way, too much of operations.
I know. I was about. So that was where I was heading. This must be very intensely operational as well, right?
Yeah. It is. So the team operates and does a lot of that work, and initially I had to manage a lot of these things.
Right.
I've done route mapping too. But creating teams really works, and that's something that, just like I talked about modest living process, teams should be your focus, and trustworthy team members are key, right? So you get that in place, and then the vision actually expands, and they have the space to operate, the autonomy to operate. It works, and a lot of the work our team and children together manage. So it's not a authoritarian disciplinary space, where we're keeping everybody in check. There's a lot of autonomy our children experience in this space. They own this space. We make mistakes, but we all learn. So empathy is an pervasive thing in the space, and they hold each other accountable too.
Right.
So that has actually helped, because I am not disciplining these children, right? So they happily come to meet me to get empathy.
Right.
Right? We have to go meet Sreeja ma'am. Why? Because ma'am will give us empathy. And what is the process? We've created a framework for it. What's the process? You reflect on how are you feeling about what happened, right? How are you feeling about it? And what were you trying to meet through this process? And how did that impinge on somebody else's freedom? And so they resolve. Right? So we have empathy houses in place. Largely our children manage this themselves, and the facilitators become empathy house holders, and so that has really helped.
This is amazing. So I come from a family of teachers, right? So my mom herself was a teacher. She retired as a vice principal herself. So this is one video that I'm sure she'll watch, right? So she promises that she watches my videos, but I'm not too sure about it. But I am pretty certain that this is the one that she will watch.
I'll give you a quiz.
Exactly. So no, fabulous. So I think this has been such wonderful experience, right? And I think as we are speaking, the weather has also become like super awesome.
Bangalore,
right? Bangalore,
yes.
Lovely Bangalore weather. It was hot for the last 2-3 days, and I think it'll probably rain. So so I think just the right timing for us to kind of also call it a day. Any last comments that you would want to kind of share?
I think this is for students who are trying to think about, or youngsters who are trying to think about starting up, is that pay attention to your inner voice, right? That's where everything starts, because it's not about chasing the next hype, right? If you want to create change in the world, it needs to come from your frustrations, your interactions with something, right? It needs to come from somewhere deep within. That then lets you go through the cycles of ups and downs and the iterations without flaming out and losing a sense of purpose, right? So the purpose needs to come from somewhere within. The other thing is, give yourself the time that you need would be my advice, right? Because you can't scare your ecosystem completely, and if they are scared, then they are adding that anxiety onto you. Then again, you don't have space, right? So create the space you need. It might come in the form of funding, it might come in the form of support, it might come in the form of time, whatever it is for you, takes, right? I don't know what that looks like for you. And the third thing is, collaborate, find networks, find team members who would buy into that vision, and that effort is always well spent. It's always well spent, and I have seen people have this tendency that I'll do this myself. This will be more efficient if I just did it myself. But trusting and giving that space to another person really makes makes a difference, and
Right.
do something meaningful that will last beyond you. I think that's
Lovely.
would
How lovely and how apt. Thank you so much, Sreeja, for your time. I think it's been such a pleasure, right? And I'm not sure whether I mentioned this or not, but she's a very difficult person to catch, right?
No.
I'd been reaching out to her for the last week or so, and finally we got to speak when I was already in Bangalore. But no. But I think well worth the time that we've spent together. You've got a beautiful campus, and I'm assuming that there'll be a lot more additions to this
come
campus
back.
as you. And yes, I should probably come back and plan another episode of this particular
There are times when
conversation.
people ask, everything is going well. Why should we change something? Education
Yeah.
background people. And I have a very interesting thing that I tell them. This one sentence. When we say practice makes perfect, right? I believe if you have to think about it as a process, and practice makes progress, would be a better way
Right.
to. So what we inculcate in children, very subtle ways, makes a big difference.
Right.
And adults, parents, educators, learning that process works for self-connection, and self-connection is important, purpose is important, and willing to make that shift
Right.
would be my wish to
Yeah.
the universe.
Yeah. No. And I'm sure that wish is going to come true. Thank you once again, Sreeja. Yeah, thank you so much, and hope you guys enjoyed this. I really enjoyed this. This has been like one of the most unique and special stories that we've done. And keep watching for more. And like always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.